Okay. Well, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to try to cover a lot of information right out of the gate. But first, just to check in with everybody, I'd love it if you could type into the chat, which should be down near the bottom of your screen somewhere. If you could type into the chat where you're listening from or watching from. So where do we have people coming in from? Kansas, Asheville, North Carolina, Canada, Tampa. Oh, this is great. Wyoming. I love it. St. Petersburg. You know, that's where my parents got married, in St. Petersburg, Florida. Awesome. 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 Oh, this is great. People in every time zone checking in from everywhere. Now, let me ask you this question. What sports do you play? You're a soccer player, you're a swimmer, you're a football player, lacrosse? Oh, we're all over the map. I love it. This is great. This is great. Track, hockey, baseball, lots of lacrosse and soccer, swimming, wrestling. Awesome. Good. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, what I'd like you to do is kind of pay attention to two things. I'm going to talk about two different stages of the college search process and how they directly affect price, and how what you do in those stages can really impact your ability to drive price, to negotiate the right college price, and end up with a fair college price. So I'm going to be talking a bit to everybody, but folks who are in the earlier stages of the process. So if you're a junior, or your family was you have a son or daughter who's a junior or younger, and then I'm also going to talk specifically to the folks who have students who are seniors in high school, who are going to college in the fall, and you're at that later stage of the process where it's really getting down to brass tacks. And for those of you who are younger in the process or near the beginning, the stuff that I say for folks who are at the end of the process is really important too, because the more you can strategize all the way through, the better position you're going to be in come the end of the process. So let's just get started here. All right. So first of all, let me just walk through just a little sense of how we're going to go here. First of all, I really just want to make sure that we're on the same page with some terminology that I'll use throughout our session tonight, which, by the way, it's scheduled for an hour. We're recording this. I'll send you the recording later. And at the end, I will go as long as you have questions. So if you want to stick around afterwards longer than an hour, awesome. If you don't, no problem here. So first, we're going to start with some terminology. Second thing we're going to do is really debunk some of the biggest myths about college admissions that I think really affect the way that people think about their college search. And these myths are just not true. Third, I'm going to tackle what I'm calling 3 superpowers that you need to get the best possible price. And they're information, leverage, and power. And I'm going to talk about how to employ those superpowers directly on this question. And then last, ask me anything. Just to give you a sense of me, so I run a company now called TuitionFit, which is all about making college prices transparent and giving you and everybody trying to find a college the ability to clearly see what your price is going to be and have access to, for lack of a better term, a Kelley Blue Book of college prices, so that everybody really is able to find the schools that are the right financial fit. Before that, I worked for 8 years in colleges and universities in the depths of the beast. I was the data guy. I knew all of everything that was going on at a college and university as related to the data, the kind of data you reported to the federal government. It was a nerd fest, I'm telling you. But before that, I was a college soccer coach for 11 years. I coached in Division II. I coached in Division I. Some of you, if you're in the Orlando area, may be working with an NCSA coach who I coached, who's now working for NCSA. So I understand all of the stuff about how college admissions works, the underside of it, the pricing stuff, but I also spent a decade coaching, and I understand how this works from the perspective of a coach, from a perspective of a student athlete, because I also spent most of that same time coaching high school students in the Olympic development program. So I understand a lot about how to think about this from both sides of this question. All right. So here's some terms. I just want to make sure some of you already know these terms. This is not rocket science, but I just want to make sure I use them and define them so everybody knows when I say these terms later in the presentation, you know what I'm talking about. When I say sticker price, I'm talking about the advertised price, the list price that colleges post on their websites that you'll see in a lot of the different publications or rankings. And I'm going to talk about it in terms of tuition, fees, room, and board. Data nerds like me, we would call it the direct costs. It's different than cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is super important because there's a whole bunch of other things that cost money that you'll need when you go to college that aren't a part of tuition, fees, room, and board. But for now, when I say sticker price, I'm talking about the advertised annual costs of tuition, fees, room, and board at different colleges and universities. When I say actual price, this is the part of this thing that gets so bizarre. The actual price is the price that families are asked to pay. And 9 out of 10 college students are not paying the sticker price. They're paying something less than that. And the average discount off that sticker price today is about 53%, which basically means that students are paying prices all across the board, from nothing to the full sticker price and everything in between. And that's what makes this process so frustrating. So when I say actual price, I'm talking about the price you actually pay. Some of you have heard terms need-based aid, merit-based aid. Some of you have probably been told that you needed to look for need aid or you need to look for merit aid. From the college's perspective, honestly, all that stuff is sort of language that they throw out there. But at the end of the day, they're just pulling together data or numbers to get you to a particular price. And it's at some level, you don't really care what pot the money comes out of. You just care that your actual price is a lot less than the sticker price. So I'm going to talk about actual prices, the bottom line, the price that's going to be on your bill. The FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You've probably heard of it by now. If you haven't, you have to find out what that is because everyone's got to fill that out if you want to qualify for any need-based aid. The EFC stands for the expected family contribution. It's the dollar amount that's produced by the FAFSA formula. So when you fill out the FAFSA, at the end of it, you get a number. Trust me, it's a crazy tool. The formula is junk, but it's the one that everybody uses. But it's called the EFC. And that is a proxy for your financial status. It's a bad proxy, and we can go on a long toot about why it's a bad proxy, but it's the one that everybody uses, all the colleges use. And lastly, there's an EFC estimator. There's a whole bunch of them out online. You can find it under EFC estimator. You can Google EFC calculator. But a lot of times you really need to know what your EFC is going to be long before you fill out the FAFSA. So if you haven't touched the FAFSA yet, maybe it's because you're a sophomore in high school. There's nothing wrong with going and finding an EFC calculator or an EFC estimator and just running something. I'll show you some of them. I'll give you links to some of them that I think are pretty good later. But it's really valuable to know what your EFC might be estimated to be a couple of years before you actually do the FAFSA. All right, there's some terminology. One person says they're having a hard time with the audio. If anybody else is having a problem with the audio, please throw it in the chat. But it looks like maybe that's just one. Much better now. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. All right. So let's first start with this. The ugly reality of college admissions. College admissions, honestly, in terms of jobs that are out there, this is not a fun job right now. And it was not a fun job before the pandemic. Now it's bizarrely worse. It's just not a fun job. The college admissions offices are under a ton of pressure. And that pressure is coming from a bunch of different directions. One is they know that the public is really frustrated with price. And they know the public is frustrated either because they think that the prices are over the moon because all they see is the sticker price. Or they're really frustrated, or maybe I shouldn't say or, and they're really frustrated because when they hear that there's another price, then they can't actually find it. And someone will tell them, well, there's ways to find out an estimated price or a predicted price. And then they'll try one of those prediction tools, and then they'll find out a couple months later that that prediction was wrong, and there's nothing they can do about it. So the public is really frustrated with price and the lack of transparency in pricing. And that translates into a real frustration and cynicism about value, right? Like, if you're going to just charge me whatever you decide to charge me and I don't have any power, I'm going to start to wonder, like, really, are you charging me a fair price? Really, is that what it costs? You sure? Well, I better get something out of this deal. And so every time somebody graduates from college and then has a harder time getting a job, or the economy tanks and the jobs that they thought they were going to get aren't there, this just adds to the cynicism about value. Lastly, and you probably have seen this, Google just introduced ways to take courses through Google, get certifications in different professions. You don't need a college degree. In fact, Google doesn't care if you got a college degree. You just have to pass some of their tests. And if you pass their tests, they'll hire you. So there are increasingly a range of cheaper, attractive alternatives that colleges know are coming. And this just adds to the pressure. So think about how this plays out if you're a school. You depend on one source of money. Yeah, schools have camps. Yeah, they have different little donations here and there, but their primary source of revenue is tuition and room and board for that matter. So what happens when the sticker prices are already really high and you've had them high for years? So you can't really just all of a sudden say, oh, just kidding, because then every class that just graduated will be furious with you. But if your sticker prices are already set real high, but then the number of high school graduates starts to decline across the country, which has happened in this country now for several years, and it's going to continue to happen for at least the next 15 years. All of that, and then a pandemic comes along and says, oh yeah, you guys just take classes at home in your pajamas. And you're starting to, college students are saying, and parents are saying, wait a minute, I'm paying this much money to just watch an old guy on Zoom give a lecture? Like, that's nuts. Are you kidding me? I'm not doing that. So all of these things together have created a real problem for colleges and universities. And before the pandemic, 2/3 of colleges were already losing enrollment. Just slow drip year to year. After the pandemic, we're looking at least 7 out of 10 this last year. So all of that to say, the pressure is getting to be intense, and it translates on to athletics. Now, in Division I athletics and Division II athletics, some of the sports, it's a slightly different calculus. But the same thing really applies in most of Division I and Division II and all of Division III and NAIA. The coaches are now expected to do a lot of recruiting, and they're expected to meet enrollment quotas. They're expected to get a certain number of players to come and be on their team. There's less expectation that those players stay on their team over 4 years, but they have to have players coming in, and they're part of the recruiting machine. Coaches have retention expectations. So even if the student doesn't continue on the team, the hope is that the student continues at the school. So the coaches have to assess who they're recruiting and make sure that those students fit that institution that can be successful there. All of this sets up the fact that you all have something colleges really want, and it's money. Sorry, I don't mean to be like a downer here, but it really is the case. Colleges need you badly right now. They need your tuition dollars just to keep the lights on. So take all of that and set that aside, because it's just important to have the context here. That's what things look like from the college's perspective. Yes, certainly there are a few colleges, probably you can name them in a couple of minutes, the colleges that get way more applications than they have spots. It's a very small sliver of all of higher education. Those are the ones we hear about a lot, but they're really the outliers. The vast majority of higher education this year, more than ever, have got to get students. They just have to get students, and the pressure is really high. So set that aside for a second, but know that context, because I think it's just really important for you to know that they're under a ton of pressure, which means that you have a lot of latent power. You have a lot of power that if you just employ it, it can really play out for you because of the pressure that they're under. Okay, so let's talk about how the college search plays out. And there are two spots in the college search process where the choices you make can directly affect your final price. The first is when you're building your college list. When you're getting to that point where you got to narrow it down to 15, 10 schools. You might not apply to all of them, but they're the ones you're sort of like, they're your semifinalists, right? And if you pick a list of schools that will accept you, but then ask you to pay full price and not give you any financial aid, you now are stuck with a list of schools where the prices you're going to have at the end are all going to be really high. Conversely, if you look at and pick a set of schools where you're going to get a really good price, a large financial aid package, you're going to have a totally different set of choices. So the building of your college list is super important in shaping what your final price would be. Then it's the last stage that can also be really important because, and for those of you who are seniors in high school right now, you're starting to get some financial aid offer letters, probably gotten a few acceptance letters at this point, and you are now in a place to compare your final options. And hopefully you've been accepted to several schools, and you got several schools with different prices that are all sort of in your price range, and now you're trying to figure out which one is the best deal, right? Which one's the best option. And at this point, you know that we just talked about it. The colleges really need you. And you could really affect your price by negotiating, by asking for a better price, by comparing options and expressing to the schools you're considering, you know what, I'm not sure which one of them is the better price or not. Which one's the better value? I can't really justify the price you're asking me to pay. All of those things, you can do that right now. And you can affect your final price. So those are the two places that I'm going to focus this conversation because they are the two places that dictate everything about how you end up with the right price. So as I said before, we're going to break this into three parts. First, we're going to talk about information. And I'm going to focus mostly on the information that you want to have when you're building your college list. I don't want to say, though, that that's only applicable to students who are class of 22 and older, or younger, excuse me. But it certainly matters to have information. And it directly affects what the list you build. But it's also really important now when you're starting to negotiate. So I'm going to talk about information. Then I'm going to talk about generating leverage. And last, I'm going to talk about how that sets you up to have power. And somebody actually posted a great question in here that we can get to at the end. So please remind me. But folks that are being recruited and being asked to give verbal commitments in the spring of the junior year. Just so you know, that's kind of how I ended up getting out of coaching, is because I just felt like we're asking people to make commitments way too early. But that's a different story, different webinar. But we will talk about this later. So Jesse, hold that question, okay? So let's start with information. Knowledge is a huge piece of this puzzle. If you have information and you can make better choices, you set yourself up for much better options at the end. So this superpower, it feeds on facts. You have to have facts. You have to have information that's real that you can verify. And there's two really pieces of this that are really important. The first is, what is your price range? As a family, as a student, what's your price range? And if you haven't thought about that, you really need to have that conversation now. It doesn't have to be a conversation that just draws a line in the sand, but it does have to be a conversation that thinks about how much have you saved? What's a smart amount to borrow if you're going to borrow? And are you going to need money for additional education after undergrad? Plan on grad school. Lots of students are going to grad school these days because that really helps them in their profession. Or maybe they can't get into their profession without grad school. And what is a college degree worth to you? Sort of on the other side of that, for some people, a college degree is important, but it's not like the thing they're going to hang their whole life on because they want to do things that maybe don't necessarily require a college degree. All of those questions are really important in helping you figure out what's your price range. And you need to have a good sense of that. The second is, well, what colleges will fit that price range? Do you have any way of finding that out? You can find the sticker prices, but we already know nobody pays that. Well, there's only really two ways to get real information that's useful here. You can get something to predict what your price would be at an individual school. And there's a couple of platforms out there that will predict for you what they think your price is going to be. Every school is supposed to have what's called a net price calculator on their website. And you can go to those net price calculators and run them, and they will tell you what they think your price might be. The problem with all these predictions is the same. They're not binding. And the data that's being used to drive those predictions is oftentimes not great. And for the companies that do the predictions and the schools that do the predictions, their sense of what's close is oftentimes not the same as what's close for you. $5,000 off over 4 years is $20,000 in prices. That's a lot of extra money. So net price, just know that if you're going to use a tool that does prediction, you might find that the prediction was off. The other way to do it is to use the tool that I built, the platform I built, and I'll show you a little bit about it later, TuitionFit. Because what we've done is been able to aggregate the actual prices that students pay by students and families sharing the financial aid offers that they receive. And as a result, we can show you the actual prices that students like you are being asked to pay. I'm not going to tell you that I'm predicting what your price is, but I can tell you, just like a Kelley Blue Book when you're shopping for a car or TrueCar, I can tell you what other people actually paid for that same product. And you can use that information to decide which institutions you think is reasonable to dig more into after you've sort of started to build your list. So what's your price range and what colleges fit your price range is critical information that you need to know. When you think about price range, I really want to emphasize a couple of things. That college, especially undergrad, it's a piece of a bigger puzzle, especially if you want to do graduate school, especially if your son or daughter wants to be a lawyer. You have to go to law school. That's more expensive than undergrad. And when you graduate from law school, nobody really cares when you went to undergrad. You might also want to start a business, and it might be useful to have some money put away to start that business. College is a piece of a bigger puzzle, and keep that in mind. It's not an all-in with the poker chips. It's not like we're trying to hit a home run. If I can just get into that school, the rest of my life is going to be awesome. Because what we know from years and years of research on college students, that success after college comes from what you do in college, over those 4 or 5 years you're in college. And it does not come just because of the name of the school you're at. Just doesn't. Now, I was talking about earlier about how important it is to get an EFC estimate. And if you haven't done the FAFSA yet, it's okay. You'll have fun doing the FAFSA. Fun. But until then, it's really important to know kind of what your EFC is going to be. Remember, this is just what this formula says we think families should contribute to the college expenses. Oftentimes, it's not close to what you actually think you can afford, but it's the proxy that colleges and universities generally use to assess your financial situation on the need-based side. So I'll make this available when I send out the recording. And obviously in the recording, you can have this and write it down. But these are 3 FAFSA EFC estimators. One is run by the FAFSA, and then 2 are other that I just like both of them for different reasons. Then there's the what colleges will fit your price range, and I said it before. You can absolutely just pick a list of schools and then go to each one of their net price calculators and run those calculations and build your own spreadsheet and cross your fingers that those net price calculators are accurate. It's one way to do it. Or you can go to TuitionFit and get a list of schools in your price range, and you can get just that list. You can actually get that for free. So your choice. I think that TuitionFit turns out to be the much easier way to go to start with. And then if you look at particular schools and you want to dig there, that's fine. This is what TuitionFit looks like, just if you're interested. You want to start out by saying, well, I only want to look at the schools that I can afford, that are in my price range, whatever that is. And so you're going to plug in some basic information, your high school GPA. If you have a test score, great. If you don't worry about it. And the EFC from a EFC estimator. And then based on that information, I'm able to show you all of the schools that students like you shared their offers from last year. And then at the top of the screen, you will see a filter, and you can filter by price range, so you can cut that list down to just schools that you know were in the price range you're looking for. This example, this is the list of schools that for this student would have been less than $15,000 a year. And it's a great way just to get started. And again, this part is free. If you want to get into the actual data, which can be very useful, you can upgrade. There's a premium access upgrade that you can pay for. It's normally $49, but because of the kindness, generosity, and the usefulness of NCSA, which I'm a big fan of NCSA, if you can't tell, you'll get a coupon by email right after this webinar that cuts the price down, really cuts the price down substantially. So watch for that coupon, because once you upgrade, you've got this data forever, and it's just a one-time cost, one-time charge, and then you've got it for as long as you want. So even if you haven't really started digging into schools yet, do this, and then you've got it for as long as you're still looking at colleges. So the first superpower, information. You have to have information. The second superpower, and now we're going to sort of start to move toward the stuff that you really need to bring right now if you're a senior, a family with a high school senior, and you're getting down to brass tacks here. This is where you have to really bring attitude. And the biggest part of attitude here is I think represented pretty well by this quote. It's what you choose to believe that makes you who you are. That is so important. As an athlete, that is everything, right? How many times have you been told you couldn't do something and then you went out there and just because you were just tougher than that, you proved you could do it? It was what you believed and then how that translated into how hard you worked. 40 years of research all says the same thing. It's what you do in college, not where you go, that determines your success. And a big piece of that is because college is a 4 or 5 year stretch, and a lot can happen in 4 or 5 years. You can either be really engaged and really plugged in, or you can just show up and punch a clock and just do enough to graduate. Both of you get a degree, but the student that's really plugged in, that's the student that gets the internship, that gets the recommendations, that gets that job interview, that nails it and has got companies fighting over them to try to get them to come work for them. That's because of who they are in college and what they did. And then 6 months after college, the name on the diploma just doesn't matter that much. Because if you're a screw up, this company's not keeping you just because you went to some name school. No, they're like, sorry, doesn't matter. We need somebody who does their job well. No college is perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect fit. But you can turn hundreds of colleges into a perfect fit. How many times have you, and I'm talking to you athletes, have been asked to play in a different position or to run a different race or to swim a different race? How many times has that happened? Maybe you're riding horses and you're on a different horse. You've been asked to do something that you weren't necessarily accustomed to doing, and the team needed you to do it. If you plugged in and you really gave it your best, you probably did very well. And that's exactly how college is. You're going to have times in college where it goes great, days it doesn't go so great, and everything in between. It's going to be what you do in that moment that's going to turn that into an experience that then can teach you something. And it's the same thing here. So when you have that attitude, wherever you go, you're going to be able to make that work. That makes you the one in charge when it comes to bringing the attitude, because that's where leverage comes from. Because when you negotiate, the school, whoever you're negotiating with, they have to believe that you're willing to walk away. Nobody ever gave somebody a better price when that somebody said, look, I'm buying your thing, but can you give me a better price? No, the guy selling the thing said, okay, no, I'm not giving you a better price because you just told me you're buying it. Same thing here. They have to believe you're willing to walk away. And that means that you, in your heart, you have to know, no matter where I go, I will make it work. I will make it work well, and I will excel there, no matter what that is. The last thing I'll say is this. It's really important to know. You've built a relationship with a coach. You've built a relationship with admissions people sometimes. It's not personal. It's not personal. It's just not. Because that coach is talking to 25 other kids just like you. They are. That's what recruiting is. And as much as you feel connected to them, and they're genuine, they're not being, fake, but they're talking to 25 other people just like you. And if you say no, they hang up the phone. They might go, shoot, bummer. I wish I would have gotten that. But then they go right to the next one. And it's the same thing because they have to get their team. So it's not personal. And you just have to keep that in mind. All of that combines to create leverage. If you've got that mindset, then now that you're a senior in high school, you're starting to get award letters, you start to get offers, you got prices, you're trying to decide what to do. Now you have leverage because you've got the information and you've got the attitude. And this is where TuitionFit for seniors in high school really kicks in, because all you have to do is share your financial aid offers at TuitionFit. We anonymize all the personal information. We never sell any of this stuff. It's all completely protected in our system. But then we organize the prices on there. And once you share information, you get to see the hundreds of other offers that students just like you with the same financial situation and the same academic situation have been offered from colleges all over the country. And now you get to see how your prices compare. And you might very well see two other offers from the same school that you're talking to that are different prices than yours. Well, that can really be important information. And that might tell you, you know what, I feel a lot better about taking this offer. Or it might tell you, I'm making a call because I'm not going to be the chump here. In order to compare prices, you have to share information. That's the deal. We are building price transparency so that you have this leverage, so that you have this information. But the only way we do it as a public is by building it ourselves, cooperating, collaborating to make this thing happen. So that's how you build. You take information, you turn it into leverage. Now, for those of you who are high school seniors and you're going to share financial aid offer letters because you want to see other data, this is what TuitionFit looks like. This is a student who was on the platform last year, and they had applied to these 4 schools. And we helped them figure out, just as a part of the way that TuitionFit works, what your actual price is going to be. It's in that price to pay now column. We're throwing out plus loans. We're throwing out work study because we're trying to get to what's the dollar amount you're going to see on your bill. Because that's what you really want to know. That's what you're trying to compare. Now, normally, this student, like most of us, they got 4 prices. That's the sum total of their world of choices. But that's not really how higher education works, because there's almost every school is still looking for students all the way through the summer. And they might have had deadlines posted, but so what? They're not beholden to those deadlines either. And they're not telling people not to apply at all. They're taking anybody because they need students. But you don't know what you don't know here. And that's where, when you share information, and when this student did, I'm going to show you just part of what they were able to see. And this is actual data from actual schools. This student saw, another regional institution in Illinois, Northern Illinois, was $2,500 cheaper than Southern Illinois. Well, I applied to Southern. I didn't apply to Northern. Did I have a good reason? No, I just didn't. Didn't have time. Busy. Well, I'm going to make some calls. This student's now saving $10,000 on college over 4 years just because they saw this information. That's all it is. It's just like when you do car shopping, when you do house shopping, and you can see comparison pricing because you can see what other houses or other cars are sold for, and that gives you better information to bargain and negotiate for a better price. So that's how TuitionFit works. Now, with that information and with that leverage, you now have power, and you want to use that power carefully. Pick Captain America here because the ethical side of this guy is kind of a big part of his character, right? And when you're taking action here, when you're using the power that you've accumulated, it's really important to do it ethically, to do it right, because that's how you get the best results. And what you have to be able to do is to combine the realities of your financial need and the realities of relative value. And that's comparing institutions and saying, you know what, I just can't justify why that school is that much more expensive than this other one. We don't have to sort of beholden to the schools saying, well, we're just more expensive because we're better. We can actually say, you know, honestly, I don't see it. I don't see that you're better. Y'all got the same buildings. Y'all got the same cafeteria. The food tastes average. I don't know what to say. Like, y'all got good professors and not so good professors. Like, I don't see the difference. It's okay for you to say that. So how do we apply this? So first of all, the realities of financial need. And for those of you who are seniors this year and juniors this year, almost every one of you is going to be able to make a case that your financial situation has changed in some way since the tax returns that get used when you fill out the FAFSA. So for those of you who are seniors this year, the tax return that got used when you filled out the FAFSA was the 2019 tax return. World kind of went bananas between then and now. So you can probably make a case for how your own family's financial situation changed in some way. Be honest about that, be genuine, and be professional about it. And the arguments you make are stronger when they fit into a sort of recognized category of need. And what I mean by that is, and this is kind of an absurd example, but you can't really say like, well, we weren't able to go on that cruise in the Caribbean this year. That's not a recognized category of need. But you can make the case, if somebody's job in the family was moved to part-time, or somebody lost a job for a period of the last year, or some other issues came up in the extended family that affected family income. Those are kinds of things that are recognized categories of need. The two links I put in here are really helpful. They're both resources that have a whole bunch of examples of letters, actual letters sent to actual institutions that were about making an appeal for a change of price because of financial need. And the first one, the college selection strategies, that is just, it's a free list. Maybe 10, 15 letters in there that are pretty good. Simply College is a site that they charge you $4.99 a month. It's pretty cheap, but there's like 70 templates there and like everything you can possibly imagine. So it's almost worth paying $5 just for a month, then you cancel, just to access those templates and look at them and see if there's stuff that you can use. Because $5, it's worth it, I think. Now, the realities of relative value is a little bit different. And this is where colleges have traditionally said, well, we kind of run the show here. We decide what our price is going to be, and we know that we are good, and you just have to deal with it. But the demographics have flipped. The conversation have flipped. The pandemic really changed the way that the public looks at this. You have the right to say, I just can't justify the price you're asking me to pay. And you might have there might be some athletic scholarship money in there that is a part of the puzzle. A small sum of you are looking in sports and maybe at the caliber where you might play in Division I athletics and get a full scholarship. But the vast majority of you aren't in that category, and that's fine. That's fine. But your scholarship packages and your financial aid package is going to be made up of a lot of different kinds of merit aid. At the end of the day, though, merit aid and some need-based aid maybe, but at the end of the day, you're still going to be asked to pay a price. Maybe it's $10,000, maybe it's $25,000, maybe it's $40,000 at a private institution. You have every right to say, look, you're asking me to pay $35,000 a year. There's another school that we haven't applied to yet, but we know they'll take us because they're still looking for students. Colleges know that everybody's still looking for students. And we know from seeing the actual prices on TuitionFit, we know that they're asking students like me to pay $20,000. And you know what? Maybe they're not as pretty as a campus as you are, but for 15 grand a year, I could put up with a few less squirrels and trees. Like, I don't know, like I'll buy a park for $15,000 a year and get my own squirrels. But my point is that it's okay for you to say that, and it's okay for you to just point to the institution. Now, the way that you communicate this to the institution is really important. You want to communicate to them, and you do need to be genuine here. Look, I really appreciate all your interest. I really appreciate everything you've done for me and all the things that you've shown us. And we've seen a lot of things about your school that we really love, and we know that it would be a great experience. But it's a piece of a larger puzzle. And justifying how much that's going to cost us in the context of maybe we got to borrow some money. Maybe we got graduate school plans. Maybe we got other things going on. All of that stuff matters. And what you're doing when you do this, and you're going to communicate this with the financial aid office, and oftentimes you'll communicate it with the admissions office. for those of you that are talking to Division III schools, or you're talking to programs where it's not really about a full scholarship, it's about partial or none at all, no athletic money. The coaches don't really have a lot of influence on the big picture. And that was before the scandal a couple of years ago. Now most institutions have set up some very clear dividing lines between how the coaches can influence the admissions office, because nobody wants to have that scandal on their doorstep. So your coach isn't going to really have much effect on the larger scholarship package that you can get. So you want to have a relationship with the admissions office and somebody in the financial aid office. But it's really useful to simply express to them, look, college is going to cost us money, and it's not growing on trees in our backyard. And we're trying to really figure out, how do we maximize our value and really get the best possible of both worlds, maximize value and minimize price, because I don't want to pay more than we have to, because it's a sacrifice. And we're having a hard time justifying the price that you're asking us to pay. Can you help us with that? That leaves it open for the school to either decide, all right, we're going to back up and we're going to pitch you all over again, and we're going to tell you how much better we are as an institution than school X or Y or Z. Or they're going to say, you know what, let's see if we can figure out a way to come up with a little bit more money. And most institutions today, when they send out the financial aid offer letters, that is not their best price, and they know it's not their best price. Let me say that again. When they send out those financial aid offers, it's not their best price, and they know it's not their best price. There's wiggle room. Now, they may choose not to use it. They might just say, no, take it or leave it. That happens. That's why it's so important for you to have the attitude that you need to have so that you end up in the best situation possible. I put this link down here at the bottom. It's just a blog post that I found a year or two ago. I just really like it. I like the way they talk about how to deal with the financial aid appeal letter. There's some really good advice in there that might be useful. So if you're going to try to appeal based on financial need, this is a resource that's a free tool, and it is from Swift Student. They've got all kinds of resources in there that help you sort of put together the documentation that you need to appeal on a financial level. Jared, great question, by the way. Is it appropriate for parents to do the appeals, or do the student athletes need to do the appealing? Parents, are you writing a check? Are you paying part of the bill? Probably the answer is yes. Absolutely appropriate for parents to be a part of this process and trying to figure out the final price, especially if you're paying any of it. Coaches will like to say that they want to talk to the student, and sometimes they'll say that because that's just their philosophy. Sometimes it's because they just think they have a little bit more power when they're talking to the student. Either way, you don't have to play by that if you don't want to. You can absolutely say, no, this is a family decision. Even though our student is playing a big role here and their opinion really matters, this is a family decision, and we're all in this together. So it's absolutely appropriate for parents to be a part of this appeal process and negotiation process. In fact, sometimes it's even better. Great question about call or discuss or send a letter. So Michelle, this is what I would suggest, and to everybody. As soon as you've got a financial aid offer letter, call the financial aid office and build a relationship with somebody in that office. And you just start out with, help me understand what this letter says. Just get some information from them. Help me understand what this letter says. Make sure I understand what the bottom line price is going to be. And build a rapport with them first. That sets you up later to then have the relationship where you can email and communicate, and you've already established a conversation. But you're probably going to have to communicate ultimately using both a call and an email or a letter, because you're probably going to need to submit some documentation if it's a need-based appeal. you might have to submit, or they might ask you for some other information that you can choose to share or not share. And that sets up this next question from Julio about how can I negotiate if I do not have any other offers? So this is a really important piece of the puzzle here. It used to be the colleges would say, well, show me what other offer you've got. Okay. That's all premised on one assumption. That's all premised on the idea that all the application deadlines have passed. You can't apply anywhere else. And all the other schools are already getting all the students that they want. So you can't negotiate with anything other than where you've just applied. Some colleges will still ask you, well, show me other offers. And usually that's in the context of you saying, well, I got another offer from so-and-so, and using that as your comparison. They might ask you to share that, and you can, if you have one. You can choose not to. Say, no, I'm not really interested in sharing that. But the bigger point here is that you can remind them, look, all of you schools are looking for students, and very few of you have your full class. And you know that. And you know that if I got into your school, I can get into that school. Like, this is not the same context as it used to be. So if a school says, well, show me what other offers you've got and then we'll talk, you can say, look, do you want to wait for me to apply to some other schools and talk to them? Or do you just want to have this conversation? Because the reality, and they need to understand that you know this, that there are plenty of other schools that are still looking for students, and they will be all the way to August. And that's just the reality of this year. So it is no longer the case that you have to have offers from other schools. Now, that's the other reason why I suggest don't position this as, I've got an offer from the school down the road. I need you to match it for me to come to your school. I wouldn't do that, because then it positions you in a way where you're stuck with just that one offer. I would just say, look, I've got other prices. I know what other schools' prices are, because that information is now available, whether I got it from my own offer or elsewhere. But I'm still just having a hard time justifying the price you're asking me to pay, and see what they do first. Because maybe they'll do a lot better than match another offer that you've got. And if you just give them that offer and they match that, they may go, sure, we'll give you that. I would have given you $5,000 more. Ha, I'll take that. So think about it that way. Now, we're just going right into answering questions here, but I want to just quickly reiterate a couple of things. Remember that you are in control of your future. Remember that you could go 5 other schools and you could be just as successful. And maybe even that's true as an athlete. In fact, oftentimes I think it's a lot more true than athletes give themselves credit for, that they could go a lot of places and it would work out great. Now, I'm going to just jump right into questions here. I'm going to leave this sort of game summary up, but you guys are asking some really awesome questions, and so I really want to take the time to just answer as many as I can. Does what you're saying apply to international students as it relates to negotiating? This applies to American students. This applies to international students, with one caveat. Every institution is not exactly the same. So you may find that one institution you talk to, they're in a position where they've got more students than they know what to do with. I'm sure that all of you have heard about this just bizarre year that we've had in terms of college applications, where places like UCLA and NYU had over 100,000 applications this year. their numbers of applications doubled. It just went through the roof, which, by the way, means that every one of those schools made an extra $1 million plus on applications, because every one of those applications came with a fee. But while that happened at the big name, brand name schools, the rest of higher education, the 85% of schools that aren't on the national radar, didn't get as many applications as they normally get. And so what may be true, like if you tried to negotiate with NYU, probably not going to go so well because they got lots of students. And even if you are on a sports team and you want to try to you may not have, and it might be true that they would negotiate with an international student and they wouldn't negotiate with an American student because they just need more, whatever it is. But across the board, this applies for international students and American students. The more information you have, the better leverage you've got. So, next question. What if you're struggling between two schools, so you want them to match the other school? Now, does that mean you're trying to get two schools, one to match the other one, or is there a third one in the mix? So, Michelle, I'm not totally clear on what you're asking. So, if you wouldn't mind clarifying, and I'll come back to your question. Can a school hold an intent enroll commitment against you? So if you're in a situation where you're signing a letter of intent and there's money involved, that's an NCAA issue, and that's a different issue. But the NCAA has gotten much more lenient in saying, look, you signed a letter of intent, but situation changed, right? If the coach changes, oftentimes you're let out of your letter of intent. Or if the institution's found to have violated some NCAA rules, then they'll let you out of your letter of intent. But there's an appeal process there. If you committed to an institution and you told them you're coming, and then you say, you know what, I'm not sure, you can tell right away what kind of people they are. And if they're willing to give you more time to think and consider, that's should be a point for them. And if they get mad at you and tell you that you better decide by tomorrow or they never want to talk to you again, and they'll call all of your friends and tell them how bad you are, that tells you something else. But when it comes to NCAA stuff, you better dig into that and make sure you know the answers, because there are ways out of those documents, but there are very particular ways, and you want to make sure that you know what those are. Do first-generation immigrant students have additional options to get money? So there's a couple of pieces here. Financial aid from the federal government and in many states is based entirely on financial need. And you have to fill out a FAFSA to qualify for need. Now, if you are a DACA student, which means that you have a different status, right? Maybe not totally undocumented, but you've got the different ways of sort of qualifying. You can still qualify for some of that need. And there are some states where you can qualify for state aid, even if you can't qualify for federal aid. But the question about additional options turns out to be more about specific institutions, and it's really hard to figure out which one's which. What if you have a, oh, I just scrolled too far here. What if you have a partial scholarship offer? Would it be appropriate to negotiate down the remaining price? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's most athletic scholarships are partial scholarships. And what most coaches, if they're smart, do is they know, look, you're gonna get some money from us from the sport, but then you'll get some other academic money, or there's other money from other sources that we hope will fill in the gap. You can absolutely go and say, look, I've got some athletic money here, but there's a bunch of money I still have to come up with, and this is a challenge for us, and we're not sure that the value calculation holds true. It's absolutely fine. Remember, this is a business transaction that you're making. And if you're professional and you're honest and you're straightforward, it's a business transaction. And the school, if they need you to come, They will do everything they can make it work. That doesn't mean you can name your price, but you certainly can ask. And I can't tell you how many students this year just called and said, look, I don't know if I can make this offer work. They didn't have to negotiate. They just made a phone call. And the school said, oh, okay, well, hold on. Let me see what we can do. A couple weeks later, there's another $5,000 in aid money. I mean, that's the nature of where the colleges and universities are. And you can take advantage of that. Absolutely. Let's see here. The school that's interested in me is offering enough money to cover my out-of-state tuition, is asking for more, pushing it. I would say this exact same thing that I said to the last answer. No, because you're the one that's being asked to come up with the funds. And you're the one who's on the hook for paying for college. And so it is your decision whether it's worth the money they're asking you to pay. It's your choice. It's your call. And you know that there's lots of places that you could go and make college work. And so there isn't pushing it. Like, pushing it is, there's a long-standing thing with colleges and universities that make people think that, like, colleges are in charge and then we're just sort of begging to get into them. That has flipped. It's not that way anymore. They need us to keep the lights on. That's why some schools are going out of business, because they're not getting enough students. So you can drive your price, and again, be professional, be honest, be genuine. And you're looking for a fair price, and you get to decide what you think a fair price is. Does this work with high income earners who are only being offered current sticker prices? So high income earners, there are lots and lots and lots of colleges that will give you a whole boatload of merit money. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You could be Bill Gates and their kid and still get a $30,000 merit scholarship for having a certain test score or a certain GPA. There are lots and lots of schools that give even the most affluent families a big discount, because they know they won't get that student if they don't give them that big discount. So this, and TuitionFit sets up in such a way where when you're looking at comparison prices, you're looking at comparison prices that have been offered to students and families that are similar to you, both in terms of your financial standing and in terms of academic profile. So when you see on TuitionFit offers, because you've shared something, now you're seeing all of the other offers shared by somebody who's in the same boat you are, whether it's because you're very low income or very high income or anywhere in between. On TuitionFit, the price you pay, is that just tuition or does that include room and board? It includes room and board. It is tuition, fees, room, and board. That's the number that colleges throw together as the sort of direct cost. Like, that's the bottom line stuff you got to go to college for. Of course, there's more costs. Like, they don't include books in here. They don't include travel to get to college, like stuff that you're going to have to come up with. But on TuitionFit, it's tuition, fees, which is usually things like the library fee or a general student fee, tuition, fees, room, and board. And room and board is usually the number that is the institution's sort of base number. There are some institutions where you can pay as low as $10,000 a year for room and board, or as high as $22,000 for room and board. It's kind of amazing. But there's still a base number that's a base tuition or base room and board. And that's the number that we're drawing from. Is it possible to negotiate for in-state if you live out of state? Yep, and yep. Doesn't mean it's going to happen everywhere. There are some institutions like the University of Colorado. They love out-of-state students. Out-of-state students pay a ton of money to go there because it's Colorado. University of Vermont, something like 70% of the students are from out of state. They get a ton of out-of-state money. But there's a whole bunch of other schools where they're just begging for students to come from out of state. Nebraska, no offense, Lincoln's awesome, but they're not getting the big swing of out-of-state people coming. So Nebraska's much more willing to sort of find a way to waive the out-of-state fees to get you to come. In fact, there's some schools, I used to work at one of them, where now essentially it's a public regional institution, but nobody pays out-of-state because they've made it so that if you just barely breathe, you can get an out-of-state waiver. So you can absolutely negotiate. What I would suggest, Kyle, though, is don't necessarily tie it to the in-state, out-of-state price. Just say, look, the price tag you've got is just not something just doesn't justify the value that I see, and see what they can do. Because they might give you more than that. You don't know. Okay. Somebody, yes, this is a question that was earlier, and I wanted to defer till later. Now we're asking it. This is great. Being asked for a verbal commitment in spring and junior year. How will I know the financial answers? You won't, not unless they give you a full scholarship. Is that normal for lacrosse? If it's anything like soccer, yeah, it's probably pretty normal. It's not every school by any means, but there is an increasing pressure in college athletics to get people to decide and decide earlier. And coaches are always using look, I got 5 spots. I'm talking to 8 kids. The first 5 get it. Honestly, I don't know how many of those coaches are actually telling the truth when they say that, but I'm sure that all of them are not. So you don't have to commit if you're not ready to commit. And then, of course, if you do verbally commit now, you're not signing anything, are you? You can't for a while. And you can back out. And you can say, look, I thought about it more. I did some more talking with my family. Stuff has happened in my life that really changed the way I think about things. If you're not ready to give a commitment to a school, don't give it, period. End of story. They don't get to decide. As a general rule, how long between receiving an acceptance letter and a financial aid letter? So that's a great question, because the general rule is there isn't a general rule. Some schools will send you the financial aid offer right at the same time. Other schools, they won't send it to you for a couple of weeks. And other schools, they don't send that stuff out to you until April. So it would really, if you really need to know that stuff, honestly, call the school up and say, look, I can't pick you unless I know what your price is going to be. And I'm not picking you until you tell me. So if you can't get it to me, then no matter how bad you want me, we can't do this. If you've already paid the non-refundable deposit, can you still negotiate the admissions price? Sure. Depends on how much the non-refundable deposit is, because if you walk away, you lose it. But if you're willing to walk away and lose it, and the trade-off is that you paid $300 for the deposit and you get $5,000 better price, that's not a bad trade. Look, it's still at the bottom line. At the end of the day, it's still be professional, be honest, be genuine. And being honest can mean just, look, I'm thinking about this more, and I know we deposited, but now I'm just not so sure the price is going to work for us. I've just been thinking about some other stuff and the realities for us, and I'm not sure we can do this. And I don't want to go someplace for a couple of years and then realize that we've borrowed too much or that we're in over our heads, and then I have to transfer or drop out of college. I really need this to work for 4 years. So these are the things that really matter here. Can you help me? Again, you have to be willing to walk away if you're going to try to negotiate, because otherwise you got no leverage. One of the colleges pursuing my son just upped his loan and added work study. And while that makes the price more appealing, that's not really money off the price. Is it appropriate to say that didn't really help? Yes. In fact, if you've got the money, see if you can rent a billboard and put it in the big letters right across the street from the admissions office. Seriously, I was kidding. First of all, about the billboard. 2, this is what happens with higher education institutions all the time. they'll weave things like work study into your financial aid offer and then say like, oh yeah, we've found a way to make this sweeter. Well, first of all, if your son's going to be an athlete, the work study option is not such a great option. At least it's something you got to think really hard about because it's a time issue. And secondly, just because you qualify for work study doesn't mean there's a work study job on campus. And it doesn't mean that there's a work study job on campus that will work with your son's class schedule. And it would be absolutely absurd to pass up taking a required course just in order to take a work study class, that because you passed up that required course, you end up having to stay in school for another semester, right? That's a crazy trade. That doesn't make any sense. So it is entirely reasonable. And think about it this way, Heather, you're doing the public a favor by calling them out on this and just saying, that doesn't really help because we got to pay that money back with interest. And the work study, who knows if it's going to be there. So yes, absolutely. This is a business transaction. And colleges for a very long time have been able to do whatever they want. And the public has felt like, well, we don't have any power, so we can't really say anything. Our decision is between two schools, but one is offering a lot more. Is it fair to try to negotiate one school against the other? Michelle, it's entirely fair. It's entirely fair because you're the one who's paying the bill. You're the one who's going to go to the school and say, look, we can't afford this without borrowing a bunch. And if we borrow a bunch, that means we got a bunch of other stuff we got to do. Second mortgage, push off retirement, not go to grad school. Those things matter. And those are your decisions that you have every right to decide on. And so when one school is a lot more than the other, it is absolutely to say, look, I just can't justify the difference in price. Yes, you guys have pretty buildings. And yes, you guys have a climbing wall. But, and I'm just making stuff up here, but the point is like, for my students' learning, for my students' college experience, I know that days are going to be good, days are going to be bad, stuff in between. We're going to make it work no matter what happens. And they're going to plug away and really make something of it because of what they do. They can do that at a lot of places. So if you're asking me to pay 10, 20, 30,000 more at one place versus another, please help me justify that difference. Because $20,000 over 1 year, that's 80 grand over 4 years. Is it really 80 grand better? I got an open mind, like convince me. But it's absolutely okay for you to say, look, this is a real financial decision. It's huge consequences. Does TuitionFit take into account in the underlying data the year the offer was received and how tuition may have changed since then? That's a really interesting question because, yes, sometimes, especially in athletics, you get an offer that's 2 years early before you actually go. So with TuitionFit's data, we pull our prices from the actual financial aid offer letters. So the financial aid offer award letter is going to come in the year that the student is a senior, right after they've been accepted and they get the financial aid offer letter. So that data is going to be really looking at what their cost would be next year. It is just first year data though. So it is valuable to remember that some schools increase their tuition substantially each year while keeping your aid package a dollar amount so that you actually owe a lot more each year. That's important to think about. The only thing we have is what people are being offered for their first year. And that's really what you've got to start with. My son was accepted to 3 in-state schools. However, none of them have offered any scholarships or grant money, only loan money. Is this normal, not offering anything for in-state kids? So yes, it is. It is pretty common. So this is the dance that in-state public institutions do. They oftentimes, their sticker price is lower than the private institutions and certainly lower than the out-of-state fees. But then they don't give as much aid. And so it's not uncommon at all for a private institution and a public institution in the same state where the private institution sticker price is 2.5 times higher than that public institution. That then after financial aid plays out, those two schools are exactly the same price because the package from the private school is huge and the public's package is much smaller. Put that up against the graduation rate at those two institutions, and sometimes it makes a lot more sense to look at the small private institution than it does the regional public, even though the regional public sticker price is a lot lower. So it's not unusual. And again, in the same situation, go ahead and say, look, this is not making it for us. If that's the case. Again, professional, honest, genuine. Having good savings would count against the help our child can get. Not really, unless the way that you've organized the money is particularly the way that the FAFSA counts money and sort of assesses assets. It's really important to have a conversation with somebody who understands financial aid from the perspective of a financial planner, understands 529s, understands Roth IRAs, all of those things, to make sure you're putting funds in a place that then don't end up showing up as assets when you have to pay for college. It absolutely is smarter to save for college than to not save. There was a rumor a couple of years ago that was like, well, people just shouldn't save for college, then they'll get more aid. No, that's not going to work. But it is important to talk to a financial planner that can help you sort of talk through this stuff. And Claudia, if you don't have anybody where you live or don't know anybody, you can email me outline and I can send you some names. When is the letter of intent signed? When will the numbers be known then? The letter of intent, depending on the sport, it can be early or late. Last time I checked, you can sign letters of intent in December. You can sign for other sports. You can sign them at the end of January, and then there's one in April, depending on the sport. If you don't know what your actual price is, and they're trying to get you to sign a letter of intent, but you don't know what your full price would be from that institution, I would tell them, like, I'm not signing until I know what my price is going to be. And they can get that information to you if they really have to. Okay, one college lowered their tuition prices by 30% for everyone, but their room and board is $6,000 to $8,000 higher than the other colleges comparing to. Is it best to come right out and say to them for them to lower their overall costs? Be a savvy consumer. Absolutely point out to them what you're seeing, right? Colleges and universities are famous for doing lots of things to try to mask what they've actually played out with in price. So it is really valuable to just meet them where they're at and say, look, I see what these things are. Maybe you phrase it as a question, right? When you build a relationship with the financial aid office and tell them, look, this is what I'm seeing. Is this right? So my actual price isn't going anywhere. These are the things, and you're just saying, like, comparing overall costs. I'm comparing overall costs because the price tag is the price tag. All right. I mean, negotiate the price at the school where the deposit was sent. So yes, Michelle, I think I recall your question from before. So you've already deposited at a school, and now we're asking about whether you want to see if you can negotiate with them. You can absolutely do that. You can absolutely do that. There's nothing wrong with asking. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking. If 3 schools give us merit scholarships, but only 2 of them also give financial aid grants, but 1 doesn't, is it okay to call that school and ask why they only gave merit and no financial and need-based grants, I'm assuming? Yes, sure. It's totally okay to ask. Again, if you come off as look, I'm just trying to understand how this stuff works. It's real confusing. Maybe you play dumb just to kind of, be non-threatening. But yeah, explain, help me understand all this stuff, because that's their job. And 2, that's how you can get a lot of information without coming off as threatening. I would say this, Denise, also, in some ways, I would focus more on what's the bottom line price, and is it the best value I can get or that I'm comfortable with? Because colleges have lots of different funds that they can pull money from, and they will do that. And we've seen all kinds of instances where two relatively similar students have financial aid offers from the same school, and the price ends up fairly similar, but the pots of money that those offers come from are very different pots, meaning that they have all kinds of flexibility here. And at the end of the day, you just want the lowest price or the fairest price. So that's entirely okay to ask those questions. Let's see here. I've signed up for TuitionFit. It's asking for a student to verify. My daughter clicked on the link to do that, but it doesn't seem to be working. How do we do this? All right, Darcy, why don't we do this? Send me an email offline outside of this at mark@tuitionfit.org, and we'll figure out what's going on. It might be that you're referring to you need an email to verify that when people sign up, we ask them to verify that it's them and it's not some bot somewhere that's pretending to be a human being. And sometimes that email ends up in your spam folder. I don't know why. Every once in a while it does. But reach out to me. We'll make sure that whatever's going on, we'll get it sorted out. Okay, it is 9:22. It looks like we've answered most every question. If you have more questions, you can email me at mark@tuitionfit.org. If you have a high school senior, please, it doesn't cost you a dime to share information with TuitionFit. And what you'll see as a result will allow you to make better choices, be more comfortable with whatever choice you make. And there's nothing, we don't share your personal information. It's not going anywhere, but you create a data set that helps everybody. So even if you choose not to negotiate at all, it just means that you're more comfortable with the offer you got. I'm asking you, please share this stuff to TuitionFit, because we're changing the world for everybody looking to go to college just by making college prices transparent. And we're doing it as a public. That's the only way we're going to do it. You're all welcome, by the way, to reach out to me anytime you got a question about anything. That's just the way I roll. So thank you very much, everybody. Really a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for the engagement and the great stuff in the chat. I will have a recording of this and send it out, and you will also receive an email right after this for families where you have a junior or younger, where we'll send you a code that you can use to get a pretty substantial discount off of that $49 premium upgrade if you want to use it. Thanks to everybody. Have a great